Chapter 21. The Great Persecution and Helena. Who moved Peter's bones from their resting place under the trophy of Gaius to the niche in the graffiti wall where they resided until 1942? How were they moved? When? As to time, it is clear from the forensic evidence that Peter's bones rested under or near the trophy from the time of its construction before 150 until sometime between 250 and 337, as dated by Guarducci. She believed they were most likely moved by Constantine's workers to the marble-lined niche in the graffiti wall during the construction of St. Peter's to protect them, given particularly the purple and gold cloth in which they had been wrapped, a cloth used exclusively by the imperial family. Guarducci may be right, but a much more likely possibility is suggested by the history surrounding the years 250 to 337. This was a period of horrific persecution of Christians under Emperors Valerian and Diocletian. The persecution by Diocletian is commonly called the Great Persecution because of the cruel and widespread slaughter of Christians. Prior to this period, it was an unthinkable crime for any Roman to disturb a grave, even the grave of a criminal, enemy, or Christian. By edict of Valerian and Diocletian, however, Christian graves lost their immunity. The emperors made war on the dead, desecrating Christian graves, ironically, in the same way their own tombs would later be destroyed by the barbarians. Faced with this danger, it seems quite likely that brave, unnamed Christians moved Peter to the graffiti wall niche during this period, leaving the hidden inscription, "Peter is here." This is one plausible hypothesis for how the bones were moved. By this period, Christianity was no longer a small cult. Christians had inexplicably survived 10 separate waves of Roman persecution. The Romans still regarded the Christians' faith in an alleged criminal executed by Rome as a direct assault on the dignitas of Rome itself. Their persecutions of Christians had been thorough, systematic, and cruel. But the net result of more than 200 years of Roman assault had been the growth of the small cult into a major underground religion with an estimated 5 million followers, possibly more, about 5% of the population. By the time Constantine came to power, Christians were a significant minority in the empire. The imperial household itself was riddled with Christian believers even before Constantine. For example, Diocletian, in order to remove Christians, required all members of the army to worship him. His own bodyguard, Sebastian, refused, and was apparently executed by a firing squad with arrows and left for dead. After being revived by Christians, instead of fleeing, he sought out Diocletian, publicly condemned him for his cruelty, and was killed. Tradition has it that Pope Caius, who headed the church during the reign of Diocletian, was a relative of the emperor, but the relationship did not save him. According to unverified legend, he was hunted down, seized in the Roman catacombs, and brutally executed along with his young niece, Susanna. Indeed, in the highest ranks of Diocletian's government lived an extraordinarily brave and determined woman who would eventually become a Christian, and her faith would change the course of the Roman Empire forever. Helena, mother of the future Emperor Constantine, would be responsible for encouraging her son's faith, eventually leading to the construction of the first St. Peter's Basilica. Born an innkeeper's daughter, an extraordinary beauty, Helena married a young Roman officer named Constantius around 272. He called her his soulmate. She gave birth to his son Constantine, but as Constantius rose through the ranks, eventually becoming Caesar of the Western Empire, Helena, as a woman of humble birth, became a serious inconvenience. He divorced her around 292, a few years before Diocletian's persecution of Christians began, in order to marry an emperor's daughter. Like Guarducci, Helena was abandoned in a male-dominated world and, except for Constantine, friendless. But, like Guarducci, brave Helena had an extraordinary comeback. In 306, her son brought her to his court. Constantine was now Augustus, emperor of the West and soon to be the sole ruler of the whole Roman Empire. Helena was installed as Augusta, the most powerful woman in the world. It is not known when she became a Christian, whether before or after Constantine brought her to court, but she was baptized and became a devout Christian. Later, following the Edict of Milan, she enjoyed unlimited access to the imperial treasury to pursue her passion for Christian archaeology. She is recognized by the Church as the patron saint of archaeologists. Indeed, she was the first Christian archaeologist, preserving numerous ancient relics. In 326, at age 80, she made an epic journey to Jerusalem to preserve ancient Christian relics, establishing churches that are still in existence today. She was deeply involved in the preservation of graves of the apostles, inspiring the construction of St. Peter's in Rome, as well as the construction of a now destroyed basilica over the grave of John the Evangelist outside of Ephesus. All three of the primary factors employed by a good investigator to prove involvement, motive, opportunity, and a history of similar methods and acts, strongly point to Helena's involvement in the transfer of Peter's bones to the graffiti wall. Possibly the move occurred during the horrible persecution of Diocletian, but more likely it took place during the construction of the basilica, when Guarducci believes they were moved. Helena died in 330, well before the completion of St. Peter's, and Constantine followed not long after. Following their deaths, their families fought over the crown, and the empire began its slow, century-long death spiral. Very likely they intended to build the great bronze sarcophagus and 150-pound gold cross that 5th century accounts said should mark the site of Peter's bones. But mortality and circumstances apparently intervened, and the monument was forgotten. In a nave on the main floor of the Vatican, there is a shrine to Helena with a wonderful statue of her. Ironically, her statue looks and gestures down, as if pointing for centuries to the unknown necropolis below. We will likely never know the extent of Helena's involvement in the movement of Peter's bones. There is symmetry, however, in the idea of brave Helena consumed with a passion for Christian archaeology, preserving St. Peter's relics until their discovery 1,600 years later by another strong and brave woman archaeologist. To many believers, including Blessed Pope Paul VI, it is fitting that the apostle was buried first in the simple earth and then preserved in a simple wall. No gold cross, no great bronze sarcophagus. Afterword. The great 18th century poet Thomas Gray, musing on a different graveyard in his Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, wrote, "The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave." Certainly this has proven true in the lives of the three amigos. Aside from the beautiful bell tower dedicated to Walter Carroll by George Strake and others in his hometown of Pittsburgh, and his portrait hanging alongside Strake's in the parish church of St. Philip Neri in Garbatella, there are strangely no memorials, biographies, or other physical remembrances of Walter Carroll, the brave priest who saved thousands of refugees and may well have saved Rome itself from destruction by the Germans and the Allies. In a certain sense, the entire city of Rome today is Carroll's memorial. Joseph McGuff later served as the Vatican's point man in places as far removed as warring Northern Ireland and segregated South Africa. Yet, after his death in 1970, he also, strangely, seems to have been forgotten. Montini, Blessed Pope Paul VI, is buried in a simple grave in the earth very near where he believed and proclaimed Peter to have been buried. Among his final words were, "The tomb. I would like it to be in the real earth, with a humble sign to indicate the place and to invite Christian piety. No monument for me." The great Conroe oil field, after 55 million years in existence and almost 90 years of production, is largely spent. The rigs are gone and the wells mostly silent. Production is a fraction of what it was in the 1940s when it fueled the Allies. According to entries on the internet, Teens surreptitiously jump a fence to swim in Crater Lake near Conroe, no doubt ignorant that it was once the scene of a massive 1933 explosion. Most are probably ignorant also of the name George Strake. In conformity with his wishes, little was named after George Strake during his life, nor did he seek public acclaim. No Rockefeller Center for George Strake. He would be very glad to know he currently has no entry on Wikipedia. Aside from a monument or two, including the simple one in the parish church in far-off Garbatella, a distinguished high school and buildings named for him after his death, his great memorials are his family and his deeds. His children and grandchildren are self-made, each successful in their own way. His namesake grandson once remarked that when he was young, he wished the great fortune, once among the largest in the world, had not been given away. Now older, he realizes the great name and legacy of generosity was a better inheritance. Similarly, a generation later, Strake's great-grandson has asked why the fortune was given away. Hopefully, this book answers that question. Because George Strake believed in and possessed nobility of character beyond money, fame, or class. He had a generosity so great that he could not hide it, even with his demands of anonymity and a faith that did move mountains. From the Pius XII Center at St. Louis University, which now contains copies of materials from the ancient Vatican archives to ensure against their loss, to the tens of thousands of campers who have enjoyed his beloved Glen Erie and Eagle Lake, his legacy proves that we're meant to use our resources for the good of others. Beyond question, however, his most important and enduring legacy lies in the dark necropolis below the Vatican. Margherita Guarducci rests in a cemetery in Rome only a few yards from the grave of Dr. Venerando Correnti, who authenticated her find. She is regarded as one of the greatest archaeologists of the 20th century. The Christian inscriptions she decoded are perhaps of even greater significance than the discovery of Peter's bones. If once, like Peter, she was lost, now she has been found. In May 2015, the citizens of Rome posthumously honored her by naming a street after her, the Via Margherita Guarducci, and testimonials to her recently appeared in various international newspapers. Recently, the Vatican website has also begun to acknowledge her contribution. Ferrua is buried in the necropolis, only a few yards from where Pope Francis placed the full weight of the Catholic Church behind Guarducci's find. There is no street named for Ferrua, who no doubt rested a bit unquietly during Pope Francis's nearby ceremony in 2013. On Ferrua, one of the few surviving friends of Guarducci remarked, "I don't believe in the old legend of Peter as gatekeeper of heaven, where I know Margherita is. But if it is so, I wonder how Peter greeted Ferrua." The necropolis is no longer the dark, dusty, debris-filled ruin encountered by the excavators and later by Guarducci. The Great Flood of 1949 has never reoccurred, and the curse of the excavation proved illusory. Instead, the necropolis has been restored and gentrified, even air-conditioned, and open to visitors. Getting a tour of the necropolis remains tricky, and visitors must apply many months in advance to the Vatican for tickets. The necropolis's permanent occupants would no doubt be happy to know that after their sleep of nearly 2 millennia, the newly opened Vatican tour, known as the Scavi Tour, is widely regarded today as one of Rome's hottest tickets. Walking up the ancient hill, now deep underground, visitors to the Scavi pass simple Christian graves, finally coming to the strange trophy Gaius wrote of so long ago, flanked by the red wall and the graffiti wall, with Peter's bones now on display in the niche of the graffiti wall. The guides seldom explain the strange scratches on the graffiti wall. As to Peter, an ancient Christian story, later subject of books and movies, relates that Peter fled Rome to escape Nero's persecution. On his way out of Rome along the Appian Way, he met Christ walking back toward the city. Peter asked the Lord the famous question, "Quo vadis?" Where are you going? Jesus is said to have answered, "I am going to Rome to be crucified again." Ashamed that Christ was taking his place, Peter turned back to Rome to meet his fate. An ancient church that may date back to the 8th century, called Domine Quo Vadis, marks the site near the Appian Way where this supposedly occurred. There is no proof of this story, but there is abundant evidence, both early documentary evidence and compelling physical evidence, that Peter was captured and executed by Nero in Rome. This includes the early documentary references to his Roman grave, the early inscriptions around it, the trophy of Gaius itself, and very compellingly, the epigrams and bones discovered by Guarducci. His body, with his feet cut off after being crucified upside down, was discarded on Vatican Hill, where his followers, in great danger, buried him and began to pray at his grave in secret, erecting a trophy over it and writing coded prayers around it. Peter's bones were later moved, either during the great persecutions of Christians by Valerius and Diocletian, after 250 and before the completion of the first St. Peter's in 337, or perhaps, as Guarducci believed, during the construction of Constantine's basilica. The lengthy excavation project is complete. The great puzzle has been solved. Peter's earthly remains have been returned after 75 years to the graffiti wall. Where Peter's spirit is, and whether all paths of glory really do end at the grave remains, of course, a matter of faith. Quo Vadis.